Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Fanfic Series 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Crimson King Naruto built a vampire harem with Anko, Femme Haku, Femme Kyuubi, Ino, Koyuki, Cruel, Kurenai, Mabui, Sakura, Tenten, Tsunade, Tsunami and Yugao. Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Friday, October 10th. Naruto grumbled as he kicked a stone across the street as he made his way home from the academy as the sun began to dip below the Hokage monument, casting a fire-lit sky over the village. The will of fire, as many of the citizens of the village would call it. Stupid Iruka-sensei for giving me detention. The blonde continued to grumble to himself. I wasn't even anywhere near the bookshelf when it fell over. However, the more the blonde thought about it, the less it made sense. The bookshelf in question was massive. While he would like to think he was strong, even he knew there was no way he could have moved that heavy piece of furniture by himself, let alone completely tip it over. Still, the scared Chunin had singled him out in front of the entire class, despite the young blonde being on the complete opposite side of the room. So, while the rest of the class got to go home once the bell rung, he had been stuck cleaning up the massive pile of books that had spilled out onto the floor. Of course this had taken him hours to complete and Iruka hadn't lifted a finger to help him in the slightest. Even when Naruto had pleaded with his sensei to help him, citing that he really needed to get home before sundown. Of course Iruka had scoffed at the boy's words, accusing Naruto of trying to guilt him into letting him go unpunished due to it being his birthday. Much to the blonde's dismay, as he had been forced to stay until every last book had been picked up and placed back in the proper order, which only added to the blonde's frustration, since he didn't even know which order the books went in, and he was fairly certain Iruka didn't either. Leading him to believe that the scared Chunin was doing this on purpose just to hold him longer. Which led to why the blonde was walking by himself down the street towards his run-down apartment that the old man had given him when he had been kicked out of the orphanage 4 years ago when he was just 6 years old. At one point it had been a nice apartment, but over the past 4 years the villagers would gather and form mobs and vandalize the residence. Not to mention robbing him of any valuables he may have had, no matter how small. Since then, any valuables Naruto had been given, he would immediately ask the one person he could trust to hold on to them for safety. One Anko Mitarashi, an eccentric kunoichi with a penchant for blood, and like him, a pariah for something out of her control. Though unlike him, she actually knew why the villagers hated her. After one particularly bad incident in which the mob had attempted to burn the entire apartment complex down with him still inside it, Anko had literally begged him to stay with her. However, as touched as he was, he declined, telling her that he would not be able to live with himself if he caused harm to one of his few precious people within the village. Explaining that he had numerous escape routes from his apartment, and the fire had only opened up more ways for him to escape with entire walls missing between the apartments. Anko had not liked that, but had conceded, though she had made it very clear that if something like that were to happen again, she would drag him to her apartment and lock him inside just to keep him safe, even if she had to tie him to her bed. This of course had caused the blonde to blush severely at the unintended implications, followed by a string of teasing. Though honestly, I really wouldn't mind if Anko-chan did want to do such things with me. Naruto grinned at the thought. After all, she is only 4 or 5 years older than me. While he still had a crush on Sakura, if he were forced to choose between Sakura and Anko, he would take Anko without any hesitation. Sure, Sakura was cute and, well, that was literally all she had going for her. This thought caused the young blonde to pause in his step and frown slightly. Speaking of which, why do I like Sakura? He mentally questioned himself, for the first time not using the affectionate chan suffix at the end of her name. Sure, she was nice to me when I was 6, but that only lasted a week before she became just like everyone else. And unlike the other kids, I can't blame her parents, since her mother encouraged her to be friends with me. Sure, he didn't rule out the possibility that once they got home they could have told their daughter to stay away from him, but that didn't make any sense, when they could just openly scorn him like everyone else in the village. Now that he thought about it, there was really only 2 classmates his own age that were even remotely nice to him. Hinata Hyuga, who was a quiet little mouse of a girl that had absolutely despised conflict and did all she could to avoid it. The other was surprisingly Ino Yamanaka, Sakura's former best friend and now rival for the vaunted, last, Uchiha. Though while she was a fangirl for the emo, at least she didn't treat others like trash like Sakura did. Anko-chan on the other hand. He grinned as he continued his previous train of thought. While Sakura could be described as cute, Anko is the very definition of a femme fatale. Despite only being 15, she already has the curves that complemented her lithe frame, and unlike Sakura, she took her career as a kunoichi very seriously. Maybe I should teasingly ask her out on a date when she gets back, and see what she does. Naruto commented offhandedly to himself with a slight grin. Normally when his birthday approached, Anko would take it upon herself to escort him wherever he needed to go. However, this particular week she had been tasked with a reconnaissance mission outside of the village, which was highly unusual, since she was the second in command for the torture and interrogation department within the village. Something that the snake mistress had been vocal about when she had been given the mission. However, orders were orders, and she was forced to accept the mission since she was the best at infiltration. However, before she left, Anko had made it very clear to the old man that should anything happen to her Naruto while she was out of the village, she would personally hunt down all involved with a wrathful vengeance. Snapping out of his musing, Naruto realized that he was completely alone on the street. No sounds, nothing, only complete and utter silence. For most people, this wouldn't have seemed too odd, as it was the time of day that many were in their homes and relaxing, but for Naruto, it spelled trouble. Feeling a sense of dread washing over him, he picked up his pace to a slight jog as he hurried towards his apartment. However, the blonde boy had barely made it a block before his surroundings begun to shimmer and drop, revealing a waiting mob of villagers in front of him, armed with a variety of weapons, everything from broken bottles to kitchen knives, whilst the shinobi in the group had their kunai and shuriken, forcing Naruto to stop in his tracks. Turning around, he froze as he saw a second mob closing in on him from behind. "You're not going anywhere, demon." One of the civilians grinned as the 2 groups began to close in on both sides of the boy. With no other option, Naruto ran into the alleyway, hoping for a means to escape the mob. Sadly, those hopes were dashed as he came face to face with a tall wooden fence that blocked his progress, with no other means to escape around him. Turning, he saw the mob closing in on him. "Hey, we decided to start early this year," another nameless member of the mob commented. "And with that snake whore out of the village, you're all alone with no one to come to help you." Another grinned. "And you have nowhere to go." Yet another commented, while also throwing a bottle at the boy, causing it to shatter across the wooden fence behind Naruto. Naruto could only watch in horror and await the inevitable to happen as the crowd moved in on him. Which it did seconds later, as another bottle was thrown from the crowd and struck him in the head, creating a large gash in his scalp, causing him to cry out in pain as blood poured from the open wound. His cries of pain seemed to be the signal for the rest to start, as blows came raining down on him, hitting him in the stomach and head, causing him to spit up blood. Then came the weapons, as the civilians would cut into his body with their kitchen knives, some of which were dull and rusted to try and increase the chance of a severe infection for later on if they had failed to kill him this night. While the shinobi of the crowd employed their own weapons and jutsus. At some point during the inclusion of weapons, Naruto had found both of his hands pinned into the fence above him, with a kunai jammed through both of them, holding him off his feet. Now unable to cover himself, the mob began to assault his body more freely, creating large gashes down his arms, legs, and across his chest, causing more and more blood to spill out onto the ground below him. As this happened, Naruto began to slip in and out of consciousness, his body now numb to the pain as his entire nervous system was sent into shock from the onslaught of injuries. "Oh no you don't," one of the shinobi said, as he noticed the boy falling unconscious. "You're going to stay away through all of this. We owe you for stealing away our families and friends, you demon brat." Before Naruto could register what was being said to him, he screamed out in renewed pain as the Chunin in front of him used a fairly weak lightning jutsu to electrocute him, bringing him back into the world of consciousness. "There we go," the man chuckled while mockingly slapping Naruto's cheek, whom could only glare at the crowd through half-lidded eyes. "You look cold, how about we warm you up, demon?" Another one of the shinobi commented with a laugh as he went through a series of hand signals before taking a deep breath and sending a series of fireballs at the fence, igniting what was left of the boy's shredded and bloody pants on fire. Feebly, Naruto attempted to kick the flames out as he could feel the flames starting to lick at his exposed flesh. This of course only prompted more laughter from the mob at the young blonde's pain. This went on for a handful of seconds before a trio of civilians stepped forward and undid the front of their pants and began to urinate on the poor child, putting out the flames that were beginning to sputter out, unable to ignite Naruto's pants, since they were so weighed down by his blood. Now to end this, an Anbu with gravity-defying silver hair stepped forward, with his Hite-8 covering his left eye, while a black mask covered the lower half of his face. Going through a series of hand seals, he charged lightning into his right hand before charging forth and impaling Naruto in the chest, near where his heart would be. "This is for my sensei, you bastard." Barely consciousness, Naruto could only watch helplessly as his blood poured out onto the ground as the shinobi of the group began to disperse, leaving only civilians behind to continue to admire their handiwork. However, one of the Chunin stopped for a moment and looked back one final time, a look of satisfaction in his eyes before he followed after the silver-haired man that had delivered the final blow. Unknown to the mob however, their actions had a witness, and she had seen enough. Dropping down from the rooftop she was perched on, she sauntered towards the group. A devious smirk on her lips. Her calf-length rosy pink hair flowing in the wind created by her wake that had been tied up partially into two pigtails by a pair of black hairpieces that resembled bat wings. Two separate hair pieces adorned the front of her hair, giving her the appearance of having two small horns at either temple. Aside from her adornments in her hair, she is dressed in a short black, frilly-style dress with a layer of white ruffles over black ruffles of her skirt. Her top has a raindrop shape opening between her B with the straps of the top crossed before reaching around her neck, leaving her back open to the warm night air with an X-shaped crossing stitches tightening it at her waist, along with a strip of pink that goes down both sides at the front of her top and ends at bows just above the ruffles on her skirt. 5 golden buttons are distributed evenly going down either side between the pink strips. Along with her attire, she wears a white collar of lace parted in the center of her neck that reaches over her collarbones, bound by a pink ribbon with a large bow on the right side of her neck. A golden oval decoration in the center of the ribbon. To accompany her top, she wears detached loose black sleeves that are puffed up under her shoulders that run past her hands, becoming wider at the end, completely covering her hands. Black ribbons tied into a bow at the top of the outermost sleeves. Under these sleeves, the pink-haired woman wears a pair of black fingerless gloves that are tight-fitting. Finishing her attire, are a simple pair of tall black boots that are folded just below her knees. Her sharp crimson eyes focusing on the blonde that had been crucified to the fence as she drew closer to the civilians that were still gathered in front of the poor boy, all of which were talking and laughing amongst each other as if torturing a child was a common occurrence for them before they noticed the exotic pink-haired beauty stalking towards them, each gaining a lecherous grin on their faces, and some began to proposition the girl for a night of pleasure with the heroes of the village for disposing of the demon brat that killed their beloved Yondaime. Pathetic, the pink-haired girl scoffed at the men. A bunch of arrogant insects thinking that they are brave for beating a mere child. This is no child, bitch. One of the civilians snarled. This is the demon that killed our beloved Yondaime. Demons come in many forms, but never in the form of an innocent child. She responded cryptically. Before any of the villagers could retort, the pink-haired girl shot forward with blinding speed, hitting her unlucky target so fast that he was literally cut in half from the impact of the blow. Not giving the rest time to react to what was transpiring, the young girl proceeded to quickly and effortlessly slaughter those present, leaving those from the mob as nothing but paste on the ground. Smirking at her work, she licked the blood off her fingers before turning to the crucified boy. Approaching him, she could see he was still alive, but just barely. Knowing he only had minutes to live, she cupped his face and moved it so that he was looking into her eyes. Beautiful, he whispered weakly. I've been watching you for some time, Naruto-kun. She smiled tenderly. But we don't have much time. I have the means to save you, but it will come at a price. Do you understand, Naruto-kun? Weakly Naruto nodded, indicating that he understood. While he didn't know what price he would have to pay he surely wasn't ready to die just yet. He still had to ask Anko out on a date. Very good. Normally I would have to drain you until you were on the Shinigami's doorstep, but it looks like these fools have already done that. She commented, though still proceeded to wipe some of his blood from his neck and lick it off her finger, causing her eyes to widen slightly before she shook it off. Grinning knowingly, she bit the inside of her cheek, causing her mouth to become filled with her own blood before she leaned forward and pressed her lips against Naruto's, gently forcing his mouth open to allow her blood to flow into his mouth and down his throat. Meanwhile, she reached up and easily removed the kunai that held his hands up, tossing it away as she supported his limp form. Breaking the kiss, she picked him up in a bridal position. That was my first kiss. He responded weakly before darkness fully claimed him, earning a smile from the pink-haired vampire as she disappeared into the night, just as the Anbu on patrol arrived, only to find that a massacre had taken place. Shit, Anko is going to be pissed. One of the Anbu with purple hair thought behind her cat mask, all the while cursing the fact that her team had been held up due to a dispute that had erupted in the market square that had taken their attention off their charge. The next morning, slowly, Naruto stirred awake as the sunlight filtered through the curtains of the room he was in. Turning over in the bed to hide his face from the invading sunlight, he was met face to face with a red-haired woman whom was also asleep in the same bed as him. However, what completely woke him up was the fact that she was completely. What the? Naruto didn't get to finish his shock as he fell out of the bed and landed with a thud onto the hardwood floor. It was then that he realized that not only was he in bed with a yet attractive woman, but that he was not in his apartment. Hell, this room alone was bigger than his entire apartment. Ah, you're awake, came a feminine voice from the door, prompting the young blonde to look towards the door from where the voice had come from. In doing so, he was greeted with the sight of the pink-haired girl from the previous night. Realizing this, he quickly looked down and examined his own body only to realize another embarrassing fact. Like the woman in the bed, he was also in a state of undress. Seeing this, he quickly covered himself with the blankets that had come with him in an attempt to save his modesty. I am glad to see your turning went perfectly. she commented as she fully entered the room and walked over to the window, opening the curtains to allow the sunlight to completely flood the room, causing the woman still on the bed to groan in protest. "What do you mean, my turning?" Naruto asked, clearly confused. "Last night you were attacked, remember?" the pink-haired girl inquired, earning a nod from the blonde. "In order to save your life, or to be exact, to give you a chance at life, I changed you into a vampire, like myself. Though it did have some unforeseen consequences." "Wait, a vampire?" The blonde tilted his head as he sat up into a sitting position on the floor. "You mean, drink blood, turning into bats, and get staked in the heart vampire?" This caused the pink-haired girl to giggle at the boy's antics. To put it simply, she found his confusion to be cute. "Well, the drink blood part, yes, but where are my manners?" the pink-haired vampire commented before she took an exaggerated bow before him. "My name is Cruel Teps, last survivor of the House of Teps." Pleasure to meet you," Naruto responded a bit embarrassed. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki." Cruel smiled as she walked over to him. "As I said, I've been watching you for a while." "Why me?" the blonde asked, carefully standing up so he could sit more comfortably on the bed, though keeping the blankets in place to cover his modesty. "In truth?" the pinkett inquired, earning another nod from the newly turned vampire. "I've been looking for the perfect mate, a king if you will." Hearing this, Naruto's eyes widened in shock. She chose him of all people, to be her mate. Her king, as she called it. "But why me?" he asked again, trying to wrap his mind around what he had just been told. "Surely there are other far stronger guys out there." "You are far stronger than you realize, Naruto-kun." She giggled, sitting on the bed next to him, causing him to shift rather nervously. "And strength doesn't always mean physical. The strength I've been looking for resides within here," she continued as she placed her hand on his chest where his heart is. Upon doing so, Naruto realized yet another thing. His heart was still beating, and rather quickly due to the close proximity of Cruel sitting next to him. However, Naruto realized one last, and a bit depressing thing, prompting him to slump his shoulders in a depressed state. Though before he could ponder this depressing fact for much longer, the pink-haired vampire interrupted his musings. "You're worried you won't be able to ask your hubby Haim out on a date, aren't you?" She smiled knowingly. "Wah," was Naruto's intelligent response, causing Cruel to giggle once more. "I gained some of your memories when I tasted your blood last night," she replied with a smirk. "And don't worry, as the only male vampire in this coven, you can seek out other mates." "Wait, you can see my memories just by drinking my blood?" Naruto inquired, now becoming a bit more interested in this vampire stuff. "Not just that," the pinkett pointed out. "If you drink the blood of a shinobi, you can gain some of their knowledge of jutsus and such. However, unless you practice with them, you will not be able to perform the jutsus at the same level. You will still need to learn their discipline." Naruto could only gape like a fish for a handful of seconds as he let that register in his brain. He could learn countless jutsu just by feeding off of a shinobi, though he would still need to train in it to perfect any jutsu he were to gain from said feeding. "I suppose this is where you tell me that I shouldn't go drinking blood from random shinobi just to learn new jutsus." "Got it in one," Cruel giggled. "Yeah, I guess it would be bad if I went off like some rabid animal." He nervously chuckled, rubbing the back of his head. "So what happens now? I mean, I know nothing about being a vampire except what is shown in the movies and books." "Well, you know blood will be a big part of your new life," Cruel stated, earning a nod from the blonde. "As for the movies and books, forget it. If we literally had all of those weaknesses, we wouldn't be very good predators, now would we? So from you opening the window, I already gathered that sunlight doesn't do jack against a vampire, unless you have seals on the window or something. Naruto observed. Correct. No need to worry about losing your tan. What about silver, holy ground, or stakes through the heart? Nope, nope, and while painful, nope. Ramen? Naruto inquired, almost pitifully. This of course earned another cute giggle from the pink-haired vampire. Don't worry, you can still enjoy your ramen. She smiled. Though just so you know, while it will fill you up, it will not give you the nutrients you need. However, don't sweet the blood drinking just yet. For the first few days, you will be drinking from me. Drinking from you, he stammered, his face burning red with a blush. Yes, Cruel replied. This is how I pass on my knowledge and teachings to you. The same way I was able to see your memories, you will gain some of my knowledge. Speaking of which, you're probably hungry, aren't you? Almost as if on cue, his throat began to feel dry and parched, prompting him to lick his lips slightly. Seeing this, Cruel smiled and stood up and brought him to stand with her, the blanket forgotten. Tilting her neck to the side to give him access, she brought her mate in close and allowed him to follow his instincts. On Naruto's end, he could smell the blood coursing underneath the pinket's skin. As such, he could feel his canines lengthening slightly. Opening his mouth, he bit down onto her exposed neck, allowing her warm crimson fluid to flood his mouth as he was rewarded with a pleasured moan from the pinket. This went on for a handful of minutes before Naruto removed his mouth from her neck, drawing in deep breaths of air as he hadn't realized he had been holding his breath the entire time he had fed from her. Very good, Naruto-kun, Cruel praised as she peered into his cerulean blue's eyes. Leaning in, she captured his lips, tasting her own blood upon them. Though unlike the previous night, this was a more sensual kiss filled with emotion and love before she broke the kiss with a smile. You said there was a complication with my turning. Naruto remembered, though completely forgetting about his state of undress. What did you mean by that? That would be me. A voice sounded from the bed behind them, prompting Naruto to turn around and peer into a pair of crimson eyes, with slit pupils. However, when he turned around, the red-haired beauty that laid across the bed blushed and quickly turned her face away. At first Naruto was confused until a slight draft of air alerted him to his nether regions. Blushing in embarrassment, he quickly covered up. Sorry, he stammered. Who are you? I am Yoko Kurama. The red-haired woman introduced herself, while covering her own self with the sheets that were still on the bed. But you probably know me better as the Kyuubi no Yoko. Hearing this, Naruto's eyes went wide while his blood ran cold. But, how? Well, the Shinigami's seal bound both of our souls together. If you die, I die kind of thing. Yoko explained. However, since you technically died with your turning, I was released from the seal. Though our souls are still bounded together, so since you're still here, I'm still here. Out of curiosity, Naruto looked down at his gut and found that the seal was still there, but severely faded. So what now? Naruto asked, looking back to the red-haired woman. Are you going to finish destroying the village or? PFF'd. I didn't even want to do that in the first place. The Kyuubi woman scoffed, rolling her eyes. That damned Okich bastard trapped me in a genjutsu after he ripped me from your mother. Wait, my mother? Yes. Yoko sighed at the sad fact that her friend was gone, though she found it odd that the boy didn't know who his mother was. Your mother, Kushina Uzumaki, was my previous host. Upon hearing this, Naruto couldn't help but slump down onto the bed as his knees gave out. Silently, he sobbed to himself, allowing his tears to fall freely down his cheeks. He didn't know if he should be happy that he finally knew who his mother was, or if he should be upset. Clearly the old man knew who his parents were, yet whenever he asked the elder Hokage, it was always the same answer. A soft apology, and that he didn't know. While Yoko was confused by the blonde's reaction, Cruel understood, having already had access to his memories. Kneeling down, she wrapped her arms around him and comforted him the best he could. Peering over the blonde's shoulder at the crimson-haired woman, she noted the Kyuubi woman's confusion. Naruto-kun is unaware of who his parents are. She sighed. Every time he would ask the old monkey, he was always given the same lie. What do you mean? Yoko asked, even more confused now. Who is the Hokage anyways? Hiruzen Sarutobi. But, he was the one that married both Minato and Kushina. The red-haired woman exclaimed. What? Naruto swiftly turned to face the Kyuubi woman. You mean that the Yondaime is my father? Yes. Yoko titled her head in confusion, still confused before she turned to Cruel, whom had positioned herself next to the blonde and continued to work to calm him. Why doesn't he know who his parents are? I don't know. Cruel answered honestly as he stroked the blonde's back before smiling. But you just fulfilled one of his biggest dreams. He finally knows who his parents are. For her part, Yoko couldn't help but to smile at that. During her time within Kushina, the demoness would listen to her host gush for hours about how strong and handsome her little boy was going to be, and woe to the unfortunate soul that tried to tell her it wasn't going to be a boy. Not to mention, one thing the Kushina was very adamant about, was the fact that as the last male Uzumaki, he was going to have lots of wives to give her lots of grandchildren to spoil. Cruel-chan, Naruto sniffled, having composed himself a bit more. Are there any cloths we can change into? At this, Cruel couldn't help but giggle at the boy's embarrassment, but nodded nonetheless and got up and walked over to a nearby closet and brought out a fresh pair of clothing, which consisted of a pair of black sweatpants and a white t-shirt. These should do for now until we can get the two of you some clothing more to your tastes. The Pinkett smiled as she handed her two new guests. Nodding in thanks, Naruto proceeded into the bathroom connected to the room with the blankets still wrapped around his waist, allowing the two girls alone. Once the door shut, Cruel looked to the Kyuubi woman. I need to go have a talk with the old blood sack. Cruel stated, while I am gone, why don't you talk to him about his mother? Very well, Yoko replied as she swiftly changed into the clothing provided. Though she had intended to have a long talk with the blonde Uzumaki about his heritage anyways. Feeling guilty that she was the reason the boy was an orphan and hated throughout the village. Nodding, the pink-haired vampire departed the room. Knowing she only had 2 days to teach her newly turned mate the ways of being a vampire, and the importance of keeping their race a secret from the common populace, at least now while their numbers were so low. But for now, she had to inform the old blood sack of what happened, and that Naruto was hers now, whether he liked it or not. This was not a good day for the Sandaime Hokage. First, there was the report of numerous missing civilians that hadn't come home from the previous night's celebrations. Then there was the fire in the red light district that had engulfed the entire structure before Anbu were able to get it under control to prevent it from spreading to neighboring buildings. Lastly, and the most concerning, was the disappearance of one Naruto Uzumaki. Which led to his current predicament. What the hell happened? A very irate snake mistress demanded as she slammed her hands down on the old mon's desk, causing it to crack slightly under the impact as the 15-year-old began to leak out a considerable amount of killer intent. I was gone for 3 days, and when I get back, Naruto-kun is missing, and his apartment burned down. You promised me, old man. You promised me that he would be looked after. He was being watched over. Hiruzen feebly defended. I had assigned Inu's Anbu team to watch over Naruto-kun. So what you're telling me is that either Inu's team is incompetent. Enko hissed out as black markings were beginning to slowly spread from her shoulder where her curse mark was located, causing some alarm for the Anbu hidden within the office. Or they are involved with Naruto-kun's disappearance. Damn it, old man, why the hell did you have to send me on this mission? The snake mistress continued as her anger grew, ignoring the growing black marks that were now beginning to travel up her face as her hair started to become more wild in appearance, breaking free of the hair tie that kept it up in her usual fanned ponytail. You know how these walking sacks of shit get around this time of the year. Now Anko dear, I know you're upset. Upset? Anko questioned sarcastically. I get upset when it takes longer than 5 minutes for my dango to arrive. I get upset when my playmate I am interrogating breaks easily and spills everything before I get a chance to really sink my fangs into them. I get upset when that frog fucker of a student of yours tries to blackmails me for. So right now, I am not upset. I'm fucking pissed off. The elder village leader couldn't help but to frown at this bit of information. While he knew that Jiraiya was a pervert, as evident by the publishing of his Ika Ika Paradise books, but to learn that one of his students was blackmailing a kunoichi of the village didn't sit well with him. Hiruzen made a mental note to confront Jiraiya about his actions regarding his kunoichi. That is, if he survives his current encounter. Anko, I assure you. Hiruzen took a deep breath and sighed. I have dispatched every available shinobi to search for young Naruto-kun or any clues as to his whereabouts. And how many of them will actually care if Naruto-kun is safe? Anko challenged with narrowed eyes as her markings ceased spreading, at least for the moment, giving her an extremely intimidating appearance. For his part, Hiruzen couldn't help but flinch at her statement. He knew there were very few that actually cared for the boy, namely the snake mistress before him and her fellow ice queens of Konoha. He had hoped that his own shinobi would be professional enough to carry out their duties regardless of personal feelings, though he knew it was a false hope. As much as he didn't want to admit it. What about your peeping ball? The snake mistress inquired with narrowed eyes, indicating that the elder Hokage used the crystal ball for more lecherous viewing, aside from using it to check in on the blonde child. Nothing. The old man sighed in a defeated tone. Every time I try to focus on Naruto-kun, it only shows an empty alleyway with a bloody fence. This was all Anko needed to hear as she turned on her heel and departed the office before Hiruzen could say anything. Leaving the elder man to worry about the damage the eccentric woman may cause in her hunt to find Naruto, and Kami save the poor souls that would have anything to do with the boy's disappearance. One thing that Hiruzen had learned over the past few years in regards to Orochimaru's former apprentice was to never push her Naruto button. The young teen was fiercely protective over the blonde Jinchuriki, since the two of them met in a chance encounter 2 years ago when the villagers had chanced the boy into the forest of death. Since then, the two pariahs were virtually inseparable, with Anko spending almost every moment she had free with the young blonde. As such, both had become extremely protective over one another. While Naruto lacked the skill and experience that Anko had, the boy more than made up for it in sheer tenacity, defending the snake mistress when she was not around to defend herself. The old man recalled one instance when Tsume's youngest had made some disparaging remarks about the snake mistress, and young Naruto had laid into him good with a series of haymakers that had busted the Inuzuka's nose open. Of course, this led to no shortage of complaints from the council, namely from the civilian side, who felt the boy should not have friends of any kind, regardless of their social standing. Some of which tried to lobby for Anko to be removed from the village under the guise that she may be corrupting the boy to join Orochimaru. Hiruzen had immediately rejected the request, and as a special treat for the scorned snake mistress, had sent those involved with the suggestion for a special session with Ibiki and herself. So caught up in his thoughts, that the elder village leader failed to notice someone enter the office until she was standing right in front of his desk. Back already, Anko? He asked before looking up to see that it was not Anko that stood before him, but rather Cruel Teps. Swallowing the lump that formed in his throat, he straightened himself within his chair to address the pink-haired vampire. Is there something I can help you with, Ms. Teps? Hiruzen inquired. While Cruel had kept a low profile within the village, the elder leader knew exactly who and what she was. When she arrived at the gates of Konoha 6 years ago, Pinkett had requested a private audience with the elder man, upon which she was upfront about what she was and what she was here for. As such, the two of them had come to an agreement. She would aid in the village's defense if it were to ever come under attack from outside forces, and he would supply her with prisoners sentenced to death to sustain her, so long as she didn't feed from any of the citizens within the village. The only other thing Hiruzen had asked of her was to inform him when she was coming or going from the village. Ah yes, she smiled, showing off her fangs that peeked out from her upper lip. I wished to update you about our agreement and my own personal endeavor. Nodding in understanding, Hiruzen dismissed his Anbu from the room before activating the privacy seals. However, the pink-haired young woman didn't say anything right away. Instead, she cocked her head to the side before silently moving over to the corner of the room before thrusting her hand into what appeared to be a bookshelf, only for the hinge to dispel, revealing a blank masked Anbu that was now impaled by the pink-haired vampire. Letting the body fall to the floor, she turned her attention back to the elder man, who looked absolutely livid at the revelation that not only had Danzo did not disband his root Anbu as ordered, but had also been spying on him. However, before Hiruzen could ponder further, the body of the dead Anbu began to rapidly disintegrate, leaving no evidence that he was ever there. Interesting. Self-cleaning corpse. Cruel mused with a slight snicker. I suppose the old warmonger doesn't want any evidence to his actions. Indeed, Hiruzen replied grimly, none too happy that he had no evidence to pin such treasonous acts on his old rival. And while he could cite Cruel as a witness to the acts, he had no guarantee she would cooperate, as their deal only implied threats from outside the village, not within. Not to mention the panic it would cause among the council and the populace if it were revealed that the woman before him was a vampire. Now, as I was saying, the young vampire began as if nothing had happened. I have come to inform you that I have found the one who will be my eternal mate. I see, the Hokage replied, clearing his throat. So what are your plans now? Will you be leaving the village to find a place to settle down, or? He was cut off by the Pinkett's giggle. I'm afraid my newly turned fledgling wouldn't want to leave the village any time soon. Cruel explained with a grin. Despite the way most of the villagers have treated him, he still has a few precious people he holds dear to his heart. Hiruzen could feel his blood freeze within his veins as the implication clicked into place, prompting him to slowly turn his eyes towards the vampire before him. Swallowing thickly as he slowly stood up from behind his desk. You didn't, he breathed. Please Kami, tell me you didn't turn who I think you did. You can thank your own villagers for what had transpired. Cruel stated, narrowing her eyes slightly. When I found him he was barely alive, having been tortured, burned and had a hole in his chest. Dear Kami, why didn't you bring him to me? Hiruzen asked, feeling sick at the thought of what the boy went through. 2 reasons. The Pinkett pointed out. 1. There was no time. He was literally minutes away from dying due to the injuries he suffered. And the other? He asked, not knowing if he really wanted to hear the answer. The other, and most pressing. Cruel paused before giving a genuine smile. He was the one. He has a steadfast loyalty to those who are close to his heart. Like his hubby Haim, and even yourself. So what happens now? Hiruzen sighed, resigning to the fact that his surrogate grandson was now a vampire, thanks to his own village putting him in a near-death state. Now, she replied, I will be training and teaching him about his new abilities before naming him heir of the Tepes family. Know this, I will make sure he knows how to defend himself from the villagers so what happened last night does not happen again. The council will not like this. The elder man informed the vampiress. He could already imagine the headache this news was going to bring him when it eventually came out. Speaking of which, how are we going to explain his new abilities and his new diet? I could care less what those blood sacks like. Cruel scoffed. As for his changes, fear not. As I explained to Naruto-kun before I arrived here, he can still eat normal food, though it will not give him the same nutrients as blood will, and as you know, the fresher the better. As for his new abilities, simple. Explain it off as a Tep's clan blood ritual that gives him my bloodline. You are aware that with that cover, many will demand you give it to the Uchiha boy. Hiruzen warned. It had been 2 years since the poor boy's family had been massacred by his own brother, and already the civilian council and elders had already spoiled the boy to such a degree that he felt everyone was beneath him. All under the notion that if they bowed to the boy's every whim, that he would remain loyal to the village. The blood sacks can demand all they want, they have no power over me. The vampire hissed. She had offered to take care of the council members a few years ago, but Hiruzen had brushed it off as a joke, citing that he didn't need the extra paperwork. Very well, Ms. Tepes. Hiruzen sighed once more. I do believe it should be Mrs. Tepes now, or to be exact, Mrs. Uzumaki. Cruel teased with a grin. You may have turned him and claimed him as your mate. The elder man chuckled in a joking manner. But you two are not married yet. Speaking of which, that brings us to another problem. You mean that aside from the boy's own heritage, she gave a knowing grin. Naming him the heir of my house as well as revealing his newly awakened bloodline, he will be put into your clan restoration act. Exactly. The Hokage stated. I have already discussed this topic lightly with Naruto-kun, though for different reasons. Cruel replied. He is allowed other mates, but he will choose them, not anyone else. Also, be aware that any future mate of his will also be turned. Hiruzen paled slightly at that. Fear not, the vampiress smiled, seeing his reaction. While I want my family to grow to its former glory, it is something that must be done slowly and gradually, otherwise it risks imploding upon itself. I see. The elder man nodded, relieved that he didn't have to worry about an army of vampires sweeping across the village in a feeding frenzy. Now, if there is nothing else, I must be going. Cruel commented as she turned on her heel to leave the office. Wait, Hiruzen called out. Just one more thing. Yes, can I see him? I will bring him by tomorrow afternoon. Cruel replied. Though just so you know, he is aware of who his parents are now. Not waiting for a reply, the young vampiress dispersed into a cloud of black smoke and mist, leaving the elder village leader to ponder over her parting words. He knew Naruto was going to want answers as to why he had lied to him throughout the years, he only hoped his answers would satisfy the boy. With Naruto, the newly turned vampire sat at the foot of the bed he had been resting in complete silence as tears streamed down his face. Yoko had not just told him about his parents and their last moments, she had used an ancient jutsu to share her memories of that fateful night with him. For better or for worse, she had not hidden anything from him, even her part in his parents' death. Something the Kitsune woman felt a great sense of guilt over, since she had regarded her former container as a friend. Sister even. Kneeling down in front of him, she placed a comforting hand on his cheek, prompting him to look into her scarlet eyes. I am sorry for all the pain I have caused you during your life. Yoko began as she hung her head in shame, allowing her hand to drop to her side. It's my fault that you're hated, and it's my fault that you're an orphan. Naruto didn't react right away until he heard sobs coming from the red-haired woman before him. Looking down at her, he could see her shoulders slumped, shaking each time she sobbed. Seeing this, his heart clenched. He always hated seeing women cry. Sliding off the foot of the bed, he knelt down next to her. Reaching over, he brought her into a comforting hug. Shish, it's okay Yoko-chan. He whispered into her ear. It wasn't your fault. Sure, one could argue that he should hate the crying woman in front of him for causing the death of his parents and for being the reason the villagers hated him as they did, but when he viewed her memories, he could feel everything she felt at the time, including the crushing guilt she felt as she gazed upon his mother one last time before being sealed within him. But, no, it was that Uchiha bastard's fault, not yours, Naruto stated firmly, before his eyes flashed the same scarlet color as Cruel's for a split second, signifying his newly found vampire heritage. And I promise you, we will kill him for the pain he has caused both of us. Yoko said nothing as she sniffled before raising her head to gaze into his eyes that had now returned to their beautiful cerulean blue color. Regardless, the Kitsune woman stated, to make up for the pain I have caused you, intentionally or not, I, Yoko Kurama, Godime Kyubi no Yoko, swear myself to you, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze as your slave and servant. Yoko-chan, please, Yoko pleaded, let me do this, to make it up to you, and so that I may fulfill my promise to Kushina-chan. Fine, Naruto relented, seeing that the Kitsune woman was not going to be swayed from her choice. But I will not treat you as anything less than a friend. That is acceptable, Naruto-sama, Yoko replied, causing the blonde to groan. None of this sama stuff, please. The blonde sighed. Just Naruto, or if you absolutely must use a suffix, use san, or even kun. Very well, Naruto-sa-kun. She quickly corrected herself, though sporting a light blush. Come on, let's get up off the floor, Naruto stated as he stood up. However, before the blonde to help the red-headed woman to her feet, he was engulfed in a crushing hug from a rather emotional purple-haired kunoichi who was crying hysterically into his chest that nearly knocked him back down to the ground. Much to the Kitsune woman's surprise at the sudden intrusion. Anko-chan, Naruto stammered as he recognized the purple-haired woman that was crying into his chest, wrapping her in a firm hug as he buried his face into the crook of her neck. Hey Whiskers, she smiled through tear-stained eyes. Moments earlier, the sight that greeted the snake mistress was not a welcoming one when she arrived in the alleyway the Hokage had described. Her features now returned to normal, her hair tied back up into her traditional fanned ponytail. Immediately, her nose was assaulted with the scent of blood, urine and burning flesh. What frightened her though, was that she could smell that Naruto had been in this location, causing her heart to sink as she approached the wooden fence. Reaching up, she ran her fingers along the holes that had been punched into the wood. Feeling a wet substance, she pulled her hand out and looked at it to confirm her fears. It was blood. Clenching her eyes shut as tears threatened to spill out, she turned and leaned her back against the fence, ironically in the same exact place Naruto had been the night before. Opening her eyes, she observed the ground. She could see fragments of broken bottles, and even some discarded shinobi weapons, but what really stood out to the snake mistress was the sheer amount of blood that stained the ground. It was far too much to be from one person. Hell, it looked like it had been spilled from nearly half a dozen people. Kicking herself up off the fence, Anko began to look for any evidence as to who did this, and more importantly, where Naruto could have gone to from here. You look like you're looking for someone, a voice asked from behind her, prompting the snake mistress to whirl around to face the newcomer, only to be greeted by the sight of a pink-haired young teen, looking no older than herself standing atop the wooden fence. Someone dear to you, perhaps. The hell you talking about? Anko glared at the pink-haired teen, getting into a defensive stance. She didn't know why, but upon seeing this girl, her instinct screamed to the snake mistress to beware of this newcomer. Something about the Pinkett just oozed a predatory lust for the hunt. Let me guess. The Pinkett giggled playfully as she jumped down from the fence she had been standing on, prompting Anko to jump back. You're looking for your Whiskers. Upon hearing the Pinkett utter her affectionate nickname for the blonde boy, Anko launched herself towards the newcomer, attempting to grab her by the throat, only for the pink-haired girl to blur out of focus and reappear behind her, causing Anko to slightly stumble over her own feet due to the sudden lack of her target. Turning around, she was greeted by the smirking form of the Pinkett before she restrained both of Anko's hands, and pinned her to the fence with an unnatural strength. "What did you do to Naruto-kun?" the snake mistress demanded defiantly, despite her position. "I can see why you hold a special place in his heart." Cruel grinned as she stared into Anko's eyes, seeing the snake mistress remain unflinching. "Where is he?" "Fear not, Anko Mitarashi, famed snake mistress of Konoha." The Pinkett grinned, releasing the snake mistress from her hold. "Your whiskers is safe at my estate right now." Anko calmed just slightly upon hearing that her favorite little blonde was safe. Though she was confused as to how this girl knew so much about her and Naruto, even calling him by her nickname that she only said to him. Not even her fellow Ice Queens were aware she referred to Naruto by such a name. That was her name for him. "You should know that I saved him last night, in this very spot," Cruel explained as she took a few steps back from the snake mistress. These pathetic fools attempted to avenge the Yondaime by committing cruel acts against the boy. Hearing this, a growl rumbled from the snake mistress's throat. "I took care of the trash," the Pinkett continued, "though I'm afraid by the time I arrived, the damage done was too severe to heal from by traditional means. So, I changed him." What do you mean you changed him?" Anko asked, her voice shaking. "I changed him into the same thing I am." Cruel grinned, turning to face the snake mistress. "And what is that?" "A vampire," she bluntly responded, before grabbing the snake mistress and disappearing into the same black smoke and mist she had used previously within the Hokage's office, feeling she had toyed with the purple-haired woman long enough. In her eyes, Anko had passed her test and proved herself worthy. The snake mistress had looked her in the eye, and despite being at a severe disadvantage, had refused to back down, showing what lengths she would go through for the blonde Jinchuriki. Tep's estate. In the blink of an eye, Anko found herself in a large luxurious room that appeared to be a living room of sorts, judging by the furniture that were spread across the room in an organized fashion. Taking a moment to catch her bearings, she caught sight of the pink-haired girl that was in the alleyway with her rounding the corner, prompting the snake mistress to take off after her. Though despite being right behind the Pinkett, by the time Anko had rounded the corner, said Pinkett was all the way down the massive hallway, waiting for her. Growling to herself, Anko took off at full sprint, using her chakra to propel herself down the hallway, though like before, the Pinkett was gone down the hallway once more, though this time, she was standing in front of a specific door not too far from where the snake mistress stood. Narrowing her eyes slightly, Anko swiftly made her way to the doorway, though this time, the Pinkett did not move. Silently, the pink-haired girl opened the door, revealing a blonde-haired boy just now standing up. Immediately recognizing who it was, Anko launched herself into him, gripping him in a tight hug as she buried her face into his chest as tears fell freely in relief upon seeing him safe and healthy. Forgotten what was told to her in the alleyway. "Anko-chan," the blonde boy stammered as wrapped his arms around her, giving her a firm hug as he buried his face into the crook of her neck. "Hey Whiskers," she smiled through tear-stained eyes. "You have no idea how worried I was." "It's okay hubby-chan." Naruto smiled, slightly tightening his hold on her before turning his attention to his pink-haired sire and mate. "Thank you Cruel-chan, for bringing her to me. I knew she meant a lot to you, Naruto-kun." The Pinkett responded as she entered the room fully. "And if I didn't, she would no doubt rip the village up of its foundation to find you." "Damn right I would," Anko sniffled, lifting herself from the blonde's chest before turning to face the pink-haired vampire. "So your name is Cruel, huh?" "That is correct, Cruel Teps at your service." The vampire gave an exaggerated bow. "And as I said, I am a vampire." "So that means," Anko began, looking to the blonde she was still holding, remembering what Cruel had told her when they were in the alleyway. For his part, Naruto didn't know how to respond. While he had talked with Yoko, he had come to terms that he was no longer human, but he didn't know if he could bear it if Anko would reject him. She had been his anchor the past few years, his pillar of support. Yeah, Anko-chan, Naruto sighed, looking down at the floor, feeling a bit ashamed. Cruel-chan turned me into a vampire to give me a second chance at life after last night. I'll understand if you don't. He never got to finish as the snake mistress already picked up where Naruto was going with his speech and slammed her lips into his to shut him up. She refused to hear him spout such nonsense that she would abandon him over something so small and insignificant. To her it didn't matter. Breaking the kiss, she peered into his cerulean blue eyes and smiled. Don't you dare even think I would abandon you for something so small as this. The snake mistress stated firmly. So you've gained a blood fetish like me, so what? Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at this, feeling as if the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. Standing up, Anko looked to where Cruel stood. You changed Naruto-kun, can you change me? The snake mistress inquired, much to the shock of Naruto. Some sort of test I need to pass. Kill someone. What? Anko-chan, Naruto asked softly, prompting the young woman to turn her attention towards him. We promised we would always be there for each other, Naruto-kun. She stated, if you're a vampire, I am going to be one alongside with you. You are correct, there is a test. Cruel smirked. But you already passed that in the alleyway we met in. However, no, I will not change you. What? Anko exclaimed. But you said, I won't change you. The vampiress interrupted. But he will. Her eyes locked onto where Naruto stood, frozen in place, unsure of what to do as all the attention was turned to him. Slowly, Anko made her way to him. Her eyes pleading to him to let her be with him. To help him carry this curse, this gift alongside him. What do you mean, me? Naruto stammered. You do intend to take her as a mate, do you not? Cruel stated bluntly, earning a blush from the blonde boy and a teasing grin from said snake mistress. Oh, Anko grinned. Has my little foxy-kun been having naughty thoughts about his hubby Haim? This only served to cause the poor boy to blush even further, much to the amusement of the snake mistress. But, I don't know how to turn someone, Naruto pointed out, since he has only been a vampire for less than a day. You do, you just haven't realized it yet. Cruel informed the blonde vampire. Remember what I told you when I had you feed from me earlier. My blood holds the knowledge to do such things, you just need to focus on it. Slowly nodding, Naruto turned to face Anko once more, whom was now baring her neck to him. Seeing this, he could feel In's fangs lengthening in anticipation. Closing his eyes, he leaned in and gave the base of her neck a light kiss before opening his mouth and sinking his fangs into her warm flesh, earning a pleasured moan from the snake mistress. His eyes shooting wide open as the crimson fluid flooded his mouth, though he couldn't help but taste a very slight hint of dango within her blood, causing him to mentally smile in response. Along with the flavor, various memories of the snake mistress began to seep into his mind. Blurry visions of her time as Orochimaru's apprentice before his betrayal. The villagers looking at her with scorn for the actions of another, similar to him. As well as other memories, such as some of her knowledge of taijutsu, ninjutsu, and other skills. After nearly 2 minutes, Naruto released his hold on the purple-haired kunoichi, taking deep breaths before noticing how deathly pale she looked. On instinct, Naruto bit the inside of his cheek, similar to how Cruel did, and leaned down. Placing his lips on her cold lips, urging them open as he allowed his own blood to pour into her mouth. Blood that she eagerly accepted and greedily swallowed. Looking down at his handiwork, Naruto watched as the snake mistress smiled one last time before closing her eyes and letting the darkness claim her. Hiruzen swallowed thickly as he gazed at the four figures that stood before him, a mixture of relief and anxiety swirling within the elder man, as well as a healthy amount of concern. Before him stood the boy he had thought of as his own grandson, now forever changed thanks to the ignorance of his own village that couldn't look past their own petty grievances and realize that they had been attacking an innocent child. Though he could see now that the boy seemed to be more centered now than he previously was. Not as jittery. Hanging over the blonde vampire was none other than the snake mistress herself, an arm draped over the boy's shoulder as she rested her own on top of his, as she stood a good foot taller than he did. However, Hiruzen could see that there was something different about her that he couldn't quite put his finger on, other than the fact that she seemed to have a more intimate connection with young Naruto, judging by the way she was hanging over him. Even more so than she did before, and the elder man swore he could see a slight yellow glow in her eyes when a shadow would pass over them. Not to mention, there was something different about her, though very subtle. To the boy's right, was the elder vampire herself, standing in a relaxed posture in her usual attire. Naruto's sire, and as he understood it, the boy's mate as well. The Hokage was still unsure how he felt about it, but he knew there was nothing he could do about it. The change was permanent. His only piece of solace he could take from this was that the elder vampire had not orchestrated the attack on Naruto, she had merely given him the means at a second chance at life. As odd as it sounded. Lastly, there was the beautiful red-haired woman standing to the boy's left. Her physical appearance looked to be a mixture of Mito and Kushina Uzumaki. Part of her vibrant red hair was tied up into two side buns, while the rest of it ran down to the middle of her back, tied into 9 separate tails. Her attire consisted of an elegant crimson red and gold battle kimono. Though the most standout features of her was the fact she sported 3 dark whisker marks on each cheek, similar to Naruto's, and the pupils of her crimson eyes were slit. First off, let me say that I am terribly sorry for what you had to endure last night, Naruto-kun. The elder man sighed, hanging his head in shame for the actions of his own citizens. Though, it brings me great joy to see you well, considering what you have been through. I take it you've already heard about it, GG. The blonde inquired. Yes. Hiruzen nodded. Teps-san had briefed me yesterday of your current circumstances. How are you feeling, my boy? To be honest, I feel. Naruto frowned for a moment as he searched for the word that would best describe his current feeling. Complete. Complete. The elder man questioned. What do you mean? That would be the best way to describe how I feel, GG. The blonde smiled, reaching up and grasping the snake mistress's hand tenderly. I feel whole now. Maybe it's because my hubby Haim accepted to go on a date with me, or perhaps it's because Cruel-chan has given me a family in a sense. Could even be that I finally know who my parents are. The last part made Hiruzen freeze in his seat as his blood ran cold. Immediately, he turned his gaze to the pink-haired vampire only to see her shaking her head, signifying that she didn't tell the boy about his heritage. Oh, how did you find out? The elder man asked, fearful of the boy's reaction that he had kept such a thing a secret from him. I told him. The red-haired woman answered for the boy. And you are Yoko Kurama, servant to Naruto-kun. The newly identified Yoko introduced herself. Kurama, do you perhaps have a connection with the Kurama clan? Hiruzen inquired, noting the woman's last name. I do not, Hokage-sama. The woman replied. I see, are new to the village then. No, in fact I have resided within the village for a rather long time. Yoko smirked, unable to keep her kitsune nature of playfulness from poking its head out. To her side, Naruto was struggling to hold in his laughter as he saw what the vixen was doing. In fact, I've resided within this village longer than you have, Hokage-sama. At this, Hiruzen's eyes widened in shock from the woman's claim. Though before the elder village leader could voice his curiosity as to what the woman meant, Naruto had spoken up. "Yoko-chan, please stop teasing Gigi." The blonde grinned. "I don't think his poor old heart can take much more, it's beating fast enough already. I suppose I should stop beating around the bush." The red-haired woman conceded before turning her full attention to the elder village leader. "I have given you me true name, Hiruzen Sarutobi, but perhaps you know me by my other name." "And what other name would that be?" the Hokage asked, narrowing his eyes at the woman. Instead of answering vocally, the red-haired woman allowed a wave of power to wash over her, as she dispelled the illusion she had cast on herself. As she did so, a pair of fox ears appeared at the top of her head, while 9 separate vibrant orange tails flowed out fluidly behind her with an elegant beauty, each with flawless white tips. The whisker marks that adorned her face now becoming far more darker and more prominent than before. Lastly, her eyes seemed to faintly glow with demonic energy, giving her a terrifying, yet beautiful appearance at the same time. Seeing the woman's change of appearance, Hiruzen felt all the color drain from his face as he realized who, or rather, what was standing before him in his very office. "Hugh Kyuubi," he stammered, swallowing thickly before slowly turning to Naruto for an explanation. "I assume you would like an explanation as to why she is out of the seal," the blonde stated, earning a slow nod from the elder man. "To put it simply, when Cruel-chan changed me, I died. Kind of part of the process in order to be reborn. And when Naruto-kun died, the seal released me," Yoko added, turning the attention back to her. "You see, when Naruto-kun's father used the Shinigami to seal me away, he did it so that my soul would be tied to Naruto's. However, since Naruto-kun's soul did not pass on, I remained here." Hiruzen could only nod dumbly at the explanation given to him, all the while cursing his own ignorance for allowing Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki to be leaked out by the council like it did. He had hoped that Minato's final wish would have been fulfilled and his son be seen as a hero simply for keeping the fox at bay, but that had not been the case. Immediately after the boy's status had been leaked, the civilian council had called for the boy's head, an infant no more than a few hours old. It had made the battle-hardened war veteran sick to his stomach, as well as various members of the Shinobi Council to see the mob demand the death of an infant. It was then that Hiruzen had passed his law that no one was to speak of the boy's status. But the damage had already been done, and the seed of hate planted. Now, he had the very same fox, albeit in human form, standing before him, proudly displaying her tails and other fox-like features. Though the question that was at the forefront of the old monk's mind was what would the vixen do now that she was free of her seal. "You worry if I plan to continue my attack from 10 years ago," Yoko stated bluntly, as if reading the village leader's mind. "To be honest, I had no intention of attacking that night. I was content during my time as Kushina-chan's tenant, and was looking forward to seeing her raise young Naruto-kun. However, a Uchiha claiming to be Madara ripped me from her seal and placed me under his control with that cursed Sharingan." Hearing this, Hiruzen's eyes went wide in shock. He had heard whispers that the Uchiha were behind the attack, but all those ceased after Itachi massacred the clan and left his younger brother mentally scared as he was forced to witness the massacre over and over again for 72 hours. After that, most of the citizens, and even members of his own council, namely the civilian and elder council members, began to pity the boy who had lost everything, bowing to his every whim in hopes to keep him loyal to the village. It may be surprising to learn, but Kushina-chan and I had a great relationship between Jinchuriki and Biju. Yoko continued, snapping the old man out of his thoughts. Far better than Mito Mainu and I ever did. Mito Mainu considered me a pet to be paraded around. Kushina-chan saw me as a friend, a sister even. It tore me apart when I regained my consciousness, to see her impaled on my own claw. Hearing the pain in the vixen's voice, Naruto moved out of the snake mistress's embrace and brought the red-headed woman into a comforting hug. Knowing that the Kitsune woman still felt a great amount of guilt in his mother's death. After a handful of seconds, the vixen composed herself once more before turning her attention back to the Hokage. Anyways, Yoko sniffled slightly. Once Naruto-kun was turned, I swore myself to servitude to him. To make up for the suffering he had to endure for my actions, and to keep a promise I made to Kushina-chan. Saying her piece, the Kitsune woman reeled in her fox features. Returning once more to a more human look. Having heard everything, Hiruzen was a bit more relaxed about the Kitsune running free. Now it was just a matter of keeping her identity under wraps, unless it was absolutely necessary to be revealed. He wouldn't make the same mistake as he did with the boy's status. The last thing he needed was for it to get out that the Kyuubi was walking free and have some ignorant group try and finish what the Yondaime had started. Very well, Hiruzen stated after a handful of seconds. If anyone asks, the official story is that you are a maid in service to the Tepsa state. There will be less questions that way. That is acceptable, Yoko replied. However, the Hokage sighed. In order to keep her identity a secret, I'm afraid you will have to continue to act as if you are still the Jinchuriki. I understand that continues to make you a target, and I apologize for having to ask you to put yourself in such a position, but I understand, GG. The blonde interrupted. However, I will warn you, my days of just forgiving and forgetting are over. While I won't actively seek out vengeance against those that have wronged me, I will defend myself by any means necessary, counsels be damned. Hiruzen could only nod in acceptance. He couldn't, in good conscience, ask the boy to merely turn the other cheek like he used to. No, the boy was well within his right to defend himself from now on. Though, he did hope against all odds that the young blonde vampire wouldn't need to. Especially not after Cruel had dispatched the mob the other night. No doubt word had already spread that those involved with the attack on the boy had been massacred. Of course, this was a double-edged sword, as it would make the family and friends of the mob hate the boy even more. However, they would hesitate to chase after him due to the massacre. That is more than understandable, Naruto-kun. The old man sighed, before moving on to address another issue. About your parents, I am sorry for lying to you all these years. I know that it ate you up inside, wondering who they were. It's just, they had lots of enemies between the two of them, I know. Naruto interrupted once more, earning a nod from the elder man. Though can't help but think I would probably be safer in the middle of Iowa than here. Hiruzen couldn't help but to flinch at that comment, reluctantly agreeing that the boy was possibly right. But, I understand your reasoning, even if I think you could have handled it better. The blonde continued. Instead of trying to avoid it, you could have simply told me that you would tell me when the time was right, but above all, you could have told me that they loved me. You're right, Naruto-kun. The old man conceded. I could have handled it a lot better. Instead I took the easy way out. So now that Naruto-kun is aware of his heritage, Cruel chimed in. Did his parents leave him anything? Unfortunately, their home itself was destroyed during the your attack. Hiruzen stated, giving a shy gesture towards the Kitsune woman. But, I had managed to salvage their personal effects. Chief among them, was your inheritance. As he explained this, the Hokage got up from his desk and walked over to one of the many pictures that decorated the office walls. Ironically of Minato himself. As he removed it, a safe could be seen that had been hidden behind the painting. After a few seconds, Hiruzen opened the safe and retrieved a small stack of scrolls before returning to his desk. In his dying breath, Minato had requested that you not be given these until you reached the rank of Chunin, though I doubt he took into account of the Ms. Yoko, informing you personally of your heritage. Hiruzen stated, before turning to the Kitsune woman. Forgive me, It is going to take some getting used to you being free. Yoko merely nodded in acknowledgement. At any rate, these are yours. The elder man informed the blonde vampire, before handing the boy the small stack of scrolls. 2 of those are your parents' savings. Neither of them trusted the village's banking system, only leave pocket change in their accounts. The others contain various fuinjutsu scrolls, as both of your parents were masters of the craft. Though Minato would never openly admit it, your mother far exceeded him in the art. Little secret, Kushina-chan was the one who designed the seals for the Yellow Flash's famed ability. Yoko grinned, earning a shocked expression from the Hokage. Though he does get credit for coming up with the idea, Kushina-chan merely made it practical. I see, was Hiruzen's intelligent reply. Anyways, I believe that is everything. Actually, there is one last thing. Cruel spoke up, catching the village leader's attention. What is it, Ms. Tepps? Well, thing is, the Tepps clan has a few more mouths to feed. The pink-haired vampire smiled. As such, we need to stock the fridge, so to speak. Hiruzen frowned at her wording. While he trusted the elder vampire, her word use in describing her food source was still a little unsettling. Unfortunately, the prisons are low on inmates set for execution. Hiruzen frowned, as he tried to come up with a solution for the problem he was now faced with. However, something struck the elder man as odd. Cruel had mentioned mouths, as is more than one. As the realization dawned upon him, he slowly turned towards the snake mistress that had retaken her spot hanging over the blonde. A sadistic grin spread across her face. You turned her as well? Hiruzen cautiously inquired, only for the pink-haired vampire to shake her head. Nope. Cruel smiled. She was turned by Naruto-kun here. Before you have a heart attack, old man, I asked for it. Anko stated before the old man popped a blood vessel. We promised each other we would always be there for one another. So if Whiskers here was going to be a cute little bloodsucker, then I was going to follow. I mean, I already had a blood fetish, so why not take it up a notch? I see. Hiruzen frowned. Well, as I said, the prisons are a little light on inmates slated for execution. And with the unfortunate events Friday evening, we're a little light on bodies. What about those that are not incarcerated? Anko inquired with a mischievous look in her eyes. You're referring to the untouchables. The elder man stated, referring to a group of known criminals that roamed free within the village that were, as their name implied, untouchable. Due to their connections with members of the council and bribing of various shinobi within the village. Unfortunately, there had been absolutely no evidence tying the accused to their crimes, leaving the village leaders' hands tied. Forcing the elder man to simply accept their presence as a necessary evil within the village. However, this new development may give him the means to remove this taint from his village. All the better if these 4 were to come across any evidence linking these individuals to their contacts within his council. If you 3 are going to do this, it must be discreet. Hiruzen stated, turning deathly serious. Do not drag it out and make sure there are no witnesses. Target, isolate, and eliminate. Get in, snack, get out. The snake mistress grinned. No problem. Furthermore, the Hokage continued, choosing to ignore Anko's comment. Should you find any evidence that links this group to any council member or shinobi, bring it to me. Should be fun. Cruel quipped with a smile, showing off her fangs. I haven't hunted live prey in years. As he looked over the group before him, the elder village leader could see that the excitable young snake mistress was brimming with excitement at the prospect of hunting live prey, whilst the elder vampire looked rather reminiscent. Yoko had a rather impassive look, more akin to being apathetic, while Naruto on the other hand, looked to be a swirl of emotions, being that of excitement and nervousness. Keep in mind, Hiruzen stated, catching the 3 vampires' attention. Should you be discovered, I will be forced to disavow any knowledge of your activities and act accordingly as the Hokage of this village." "Don't worry, old man," Anko replied. "No one will even know we were there." Scanning the group, he saw that they were all resolute in their determination. Satisfied with their resolve, Hiruzen dismissed them from his office while pondering what the coming days would bring. He couldn't help but chuckle at the irony that in the effort to rid the village of the supposed demon, the ignorant citizens had only created more in his place. "I have a feeling I am going to be seeing a lot more paperwork," he commented to himself with a sigh, conceding to his fate. Monday morning, Iruka was absolutely giddy this morning. He had finally done it. He had finally avenged the deaths of his parents at the hands of that abomination. Even better, at least in his mind, with the demon brat no longer in the way, perhaps Anko would finally give him a chance, since she had always vehemently refused his requests for a date. Sure, she may be nearly half his age, but the moment she put on the forehead protector, she became legal in the eyes of the village. Though, Iruka never understood why the Tokubetsu Jonin was attached to the blonde brat. She was a prodigy for Kami's sake. She needed to be with a real man, not some snot-nosed brat. Regardless, the brat was gone now. He would simply use this to his advantage and offer her a shoulder to cry on the next time he saw her. Grinning as he made plans to seduce the snake mistress, Iruka entered the classroom, with his partner Mizuki following close behind him. "Alright, quiet down," the scarred Chunin called out, not noticing that the class had already quieted down before the instructor had even entered the room. "I regret to inform you all that Naruto Uzumaki will no longer be with us. He suffered an accident over the weekend and is sitting right here," the blonde in question called out from his seat, putting the book he had been reading down. Seeing this, Iruka could only gawk at the sight before him as he felt his blood run cold. The demon brat was still alive, and even worse, it looked like nothing had even happened to him. Which only further confirmed that the boy was nothing more than the demon in human form to him. Naruto, on the other hand, merely grinned as he took in the month's expressions. He could hear Iruka's heart beating in an erratic pattern, indicating the man was angry and probably in disbelief that he was still alive. "Why, Iruka-sensei," Naruto grinned, "you look like someone just walked over your grave." Scowling at this, Iruka ignored the blonde and proceeded to go through the roll call of all the students, before he continued with the day's lesson plans. Inwardly seething at the fact that the brat was still alive, and furthermore, openly mocking him. Meanwhile, as the time ticked away, a certain Pinkett was scowling at the fact that the blonde had ignored her all morning. Not once pestering her for a date, let alone greeting her with his usual, "good morning," routine. Not that she would ever give him the chance, since he was nothing compared to her precious Sasuke-kun. Still, she loved the attention the blonde showered over her, and hoped that it would make the Uchiha jealous enough to snatch her away from the blonde. Though she would admit that his clothing he was dressed in now looked far better than the abomination he wore previously. Gone was that orange jumpsuit monstrosity. Instead, the blonde now sported a pair of black Anbu-style pants, a pair of shinobi boots to protect his feet. For a top, he now wore a dark red mesh sleeveless shirt, that now exposed his developing muscles. The last part of his new outfit, loosely hung over the back of his chair. A simple black trench coat with blood-red inner linings. On the other side of the classroom, a certain blonde-haired girl was also musing over the new Naruto, and the changes the boy had displayed this morning. Though her musing were more curious in nature, rather than the selfish thoughts her former friend was musing over. Looking over her fellow blonde, Ino had to admit that there was now a sort of attractive allure to the boy that she hadn't noticed before. Perhaps it was his orange jumpsuit, or his loudmouth naivety that had hid it before. She couldn't really place her finger on it. All she knew was that there was just something about Naruto that now grabbed her attention. Towards the back of the classroom, another girl focused her thoughts on the blonde Jinchuriki. Unlike the others, she had the unfortunate privilege to witness the attack on the boy over the weekend. Though she had left before the final blow had been delivered, unable to witness the death of the boy she had come to love ever since he had defended her from the group of bullies that had threatened to rip out her eyes. She had spent the entire weekend isolated to her room, grieving for the loss of her pillar of inspiration. When she had seen him enter the classroom this morning, she had been overjoyed. Almost crying out in joy, though she had immediately noticed something was off with him. Instead of the brashness he would typically display, he now seemed calm and focused. Activating her Byakugan, she could see that his chakra signature was far more dense than it had been prior, but also more solid. Instead of the two swirling colors of red and blue it was before that seemed to be vying for dominance over each other, it was now a solid purple. Silently, Hinata Hyuga vowed to find out exactly what had happened to her pillar. "All right, we'll start off with some light sparring," Iruka instructed, as he ushered the students out of the classroom and into the training fields. All the while, scowling at the blonde boy. "You win by knocking your opponent out of the ring, or by rendering them unable to compete further." "What styles are allowed?" one of the civilian students asked, as the young boy was eager to try out what he had learned from a certain green-clad shinobi. "All styles are allowed," Iruka absent-mindedly replied with a shrug. With that, the spars began, as the scarred Chunin moved down the list. Most went as expected, with the civilian students turning more into brawls than an actual spar between aspiring shinobi. However, the worst spar and to come from Ino and Sakura, as it had quickly devolved into a cat fight, complete with scratching and hair pulling. Mostly from Sakura, as the pinkett had attempted to latch onto the blonde's hair to give her leverage. However, in the end, Ino had won by using a simple hip toss to send Sakura out of the ring, which unfortunately for the pinkett, ended with her landing face first into a fresh steaming pile of dog shit, left by Akamaru. "Will Sasuke Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki please step into the ring?" Iruka called out, calling for the final spar of the class, and one he always enjoyed watching. Since every time, the Uchiha had always won handily. Especially since the blonde had no formal training in taijutsu. Smirking some, Naruto entered the ring, actually looking forward to this spar. He couldn't wait to knock the arrogant Uchiha down a peg or two. Thanks to feeding from his hubby Haim, he had gained an understanding of her snake style, and over the weekend, she had coached him in how to properly utilize it. To understand its discipline as Cruel had explained it. "All right, gotta make sure I don't show more than I need to," Naruto mused to himself, stressing to hide his newly acquired vampire abilities. "Just need to be a little faster than him." As the two students took their sides of the ring, Iruka watched as Naruto adopted a stance he had only seen once before, making his blood run cold for the second time this day. As soon as the match started, the Uchiha had launched an all-out assault with his interceptor fist style, expecting to knock the dobi out of the ring immediately. However, Naruto had evaded all the raven-haired boy's strikes, much to the Uchiha's frustration. Meanwhile, Naruto would respond with his own counter-attacks, targeting joints and other weak and soft areas of the body, including the shoulders, elbows, knees, and stomach. Anko had even encouraged him to hit below the belt for max effectiveness in combat, though Naruto couldn't bring himself to do that to a fellow man just yet. After a handful of minutes, Naruto had succeeded in knocking the Uchiha